Off the coast of Gansbaai, South Africa in 2017, orcas isolated a 4-meter, nearly 1-ton great white shark and within minutes removed its liver with almost surgical precision. A few years later, and a world away, a pod of orcas was documented working together to bring down a blue whale weighing well over 100 tons. 2 hunts, 2 impossible targets, 1 predator behind both. And here's the paradox: despite the name killer whale, this animal isn't a whale at all, and despite sitting at the absolute top of the ocean's food chain, it has never been confirmed to hunt a human being in the wild. That's the question today, the ocean's apex predator that refuses to hunt humans. So what actually makes this animal the undisputed ruler of every ocean on Earth? Is it simply bite force and size, the 2 things we usually associate with dominance? Or is something else entirely responsible, something closer to a biological supercomputer paired with a culture unlike anything else in the animal kingdom? By the end of this video, you'll understand why raw power alone can't explain what orcas do, and why the real answer says as much about intelligence and family bonds as it does about teeth. Orcas, scientifically named Orcinus orca, are not whales in the taxonomic sense at all. They're the largest species in the dolphin family, Delphinidae. That single fact alone should make you wonder, why does a dolphin end up ruling territory that whales, sharks, and every other predator eventually yield to? Adults typically measure 6 to 10 meters long and weigh 3 to 10 tons, built around a hydrodynamic torpedo shape that lets them cut through water with remarkable efficiency. Their black and white countershading isn't decoration, it works the same way. Naval camouflage worked on World War II ships, breaking up their outline so prey looking up sees a bright belly blending into sunlit water, while prey looking down sees a dark back disappearing into the depths. Their tall dorsal fin, reaching close to 2 meters in adult males, functions partly as a stabilizing rudder and partly as a heat exchange radiator, venting excess body heat the same way a car's radiator sheds engine heat. Combine that with burst speeds. Researchers have measured near 56 kilometers per hour, and you already have a formidable animal. But is speed and size really enough to explain total ocean dominance? Not on their own, and that's where the obvious explanation starts to fall apart. For a long time, the simplest theory was that orcas dominate because they're simply the strongest, fastest, hardest biting predator around a straightforward story of brute force winning every encounter. And there's real evidence behind part of that theory. Orca jaws generate an extraordinary amount of force, more than enough to crush bone and shear through cartilage in a single bite. If size and power were the whole story, though, we'd expect orcas to dominate every large animal in the ocean without exception. But that's not what happens. Sperm whales, despite having smaller brains relative to body size and no bite force to rival an orca's, can form a defensive ring called a margarine formation, tails facing outward like the petals of a flower, and orca pods have been documented backing off rather than pressing an attack. Humpback whales, which aren't predators at all, have been observed actively intervening in orca hunts targeting other species, physically placing themselves between the orcas and their prey. If raw power were the deciding factor, none of that should happen. Clearly, bite force and body size are not the main reason orcas sit at the top of the food chain. Something else is doing most of the work. That something starts underwater, in how orcas solve a problem every diving mammal faces: pressure. As an orca descends, its lungs undergo what's known as active lung collapse, a controlled process that shunts air out of the alveoli and into rigid airways, protecting the lungs from the crushing pressure at depth while preventing nitrogen from dissolving into the bloodstream, the same physical process that causes decompression sickness in human divers. Instead of relying on lung capacity, orcas store their oxygen somewhere else entirely in extremely high concentrations of myoglobin in their muscle tissue and hemoglobin in their blood, effectively turning their own muscles into built-in oxygen tanks, the same principle behind carrying extra air cylinders instead of holding your breath longer. So if the lungs aren't the limiting factor anymore, what actually lets an orca hunt effectively in total darkness hundreds of meters down? The answer is echolocation, and it might be the single most underrated weapon in the ocean. Orcas produce rapid clicking sounds that pass through a fat-filled structure in their forehead called the melon, which focuses the sound waves into a directional beam, reaching intensities researchers have measured well above 200 decibels in some individuals. When those sound waves hit an object, they bounce back, carrying information about density and shape-dense tissue, like bone reflects sound differently than soft muscle or blubber, letting an experienced orca build a detailed picture of what's swimming in front of it, not unlike the way an ultrasound machine builds an image of a body's internal structure using reflected sound. This is where the sensory picture becomes genuinely strategic. Researchers hypothesize, though it isn't fully confirmed, that this sonar detail may be part of why orcas so rarely mistake humans for prey. A human's slim, bony frame reflects sound very differently than a seal's dense blubber layer. That single sensory difference may be doing more to protect swimmers and divers than any instinct or fear ever could. But sound alone, however precise, only tells an orca where its prey is. So how does that information actually turn into a successful hunt? That's where the brain comes in, and this is where things get genuinely strange. Orca brains show an exceptionally high gyrification index, a measure of how tightly the brain's surface is folded, comparable to how crumpling a flat sheet of paper into a tight ball lets you pack far more surface area into the same small space. That folding is especially dramatic in the insular cortex, a region linked in mammals to empathy, social bonding, and emotional processing. In 2018, in the waters near Washington State, a southern resident orca known as J35, nicknamed Tahlequah, carried her dead calf on her forehead for 17 days across hundreds of kilometers before finally letting go. Researchers who documented the event describe it as one of the clearest examples of prolonged grief-like behavior ever recorded in a non-human animal. Though what's actually happening inside an orca's mind during something like that remains honestly a hypothesis rather than a settled fact. Is that proof of something we'd call grief in a human sense? Nobody can say for certain. What we can say is that a brain built like this doesn't just process sonar data, it processes relationships. And that turns out to be the real key to how orcas hunt. Individually brilliant senses and a powerful brain only go so far. What actually makes orcas nearly unbeatable is what happens when a pod acts as one coordinated unit. Off the coast of Antarctica, pods have been filmed swimming in tight formation to generate a synchronized wave that washes seals directly off ice floes into open water. In Argentina's Peninsula Valdez, orcas intentionally strand themselves on the beach to snatch sea lion pups, then use their own momentum and the next incoming wave to slide back into the water, a maneuver that would kill almost any other predator that tried it. Against sharks, some orcas have learned to flip their target upside down, triggering a reflex called tonic immobility that paralyzes the shark's nervous system almost instantly. The same reflex a shark researcher exploits to safely handle a shark for tagging. None of this is instinct alone. It's coordinated, learned, and shared between individuals, which raises the real question: where does an orca actually learn all of this? The answer is culture, and it changes how we should think about orcas entirely. Rather than one uniform species, orcas split into distinct ecotypes with completely different lifestyles. Resident pods that specialize almost exclusively in fish, particularly salmon, and transient pods that hunt marine mammals almost exclusively. These aren't just dietary preferences. Resident and transient orcas have been documented sharing the same waters for generations without interbreeding or even socializing, maintaining what researchers describe as distinct dialects of clicks and calls passed down within family lines, not unlike how a family recipe gets handed down through generations rather than reinvented from scratch. And this cultural specialization explains something we touched on earlier: why sperm whales, humpbacks, and pilot whales don't simply lose to orcas every time. Pilot whales have been observed using coordinated acoustic jamming, flooding the water with their own clicks to disrupt an orca pod's sonar, then using sheer numbers to force a retreat. None of these are one-sided victories for the strongest animal in the water. They're contests, shaped as much by strategy and culture as by muscle. That same sonar precision that lets orcas identify prey down to bone density is very likely part of why they leave humans alone. A human in the water doesn't look, sound, or move like a seal, and their bio-sonar appears able to tell the difference, though researchers caution this is drawn from a limited number of documented interactions, not controlled experimentation. In the wild, no confirmed fatal attack by an orca on a human has ever been recorded. In captivity, the picture looks very different. Nearly all captive adult male orcas develop a collapsed dorsal fin, a condition almost never seen in wild populations and linked to a lack of water pressure support and constant swimming in tight, unnatural circles. Concrete tanks reflect an orca's own sonar clicks back at it in a confined space, a kind of acoustic distortion some researchers believe contributes to severe psychological stress. That stress has been connected to documented incidents of captive orcas, including Tahlequah, causing the deaths of trainers' tragedies that stand in stark contrast to a species with no confirmed record of killing a person in its natural environment. Beyond captivity, wild orca populations now face chemical pollutants like PCBs, which accumulate in their blubber and have been linked to suppressed immune function and reduced calf survival, along with rising ship noise that researchers describe as acoustic smog, interfering with the very echolocation system these animals depend on to live. So what actually makes orcas the ocean's apex predator? Not bite force alone, and not size alone both matter, but neither explains a pod that can outmaneuver a sperm whale, back off from a humpback's interference, or carry a dead calf for 17 days out of what looks like grief. The ocean's apex predator that refuses to hunt humans holds its position through a folded, highly social brain, a sonar system precise enough to tell a seal from a person, and a culture passed down through generations that no other predator on Earth has matched. Evolution didn't hand orcas perfection or invincibility. It handed them a very specific, very costly combination: enormous brains, tight family bonds, and inherited knowledge, a trade-off that pays off spectacularly in the ocean, but leaves them devastatingly vulnerable the moment that culture and those bonds are stripped away in a concrete tank. 2 moments from this video are worth sitting with port and starboard extracting a shark's liver with almost surgical precision, and Tahlequah carrying her calf for 17 days across the Salish Sea. One shows raw hunting skill. The other shows something that looks a lot like loss. Which one changes how you think about orcas more, the hunter or the mother? Let us know in the comments, like this video if you learned something new, and subscribe for more deep dives into the biology behind the ocean's most misunderstood predators.